achieved his goal in many of these things. But we put 25% tariffs on India for buying Russian oil, and the Indian purchases by their refineries of Russian oil have collapsed. So that is a success. The tariffs are still on. The 25% Russian oil tariffs are still on. I would imagine that there is a path to take them off. So that's a check and a huge success. I will also point out that our virtue signaling...
We have a great relationship. No, we were not happy with him buying oil from Russia, because that lets Russia continue on with this ridiculous war where they've lost 1.5 million people, by the way. Russia's lost 1.5 million people, soldiers mostly. This is a war that should have never started, but it's a war that Russia should have won in the first week, and they're going into the 4th year. And I want to see it stop. So I was not happy that India was buying oil. And he assured me today that they will not be buying oil from Russia. That's a big stop. And he's assured me there will be no oil purchased from Russia. I don't know, maybe that's a breaking story. Can I say that? Would you say? There will be no oil. He's not buying his oil from Russia. It started. You know, you can't do it immediately. It's a little bit of a process. But the process is going to be over with soon.
Here's the pattern. Washington makes a public claim so big it sounds like a done deal. And then the other capital doesn't confirm it. The world hears the headline. Markets flinch. Diplomats scramble, and the truth becomes whatever survives the news cycle. So let's begin with what was actually said, because the words matter. Evidence Flash 1. A Reuters report carried a direct claim from Trump that Prime Minister Modi assured him India would stop buying Russian oil. And right there in the same reporting lane is the problem. India did not publicly confirm the promise. Evidence Flash 2. In the next beat, the question becomes even sharper. Trump isn't only pressuring India to stop Russian oil, he's floating a replacement, Venezuelan oil, right when Venezuela is already a geopolitical battlefield. If you're watching this and thinking, this is chaotic, that's not an overreaction. It's the point. The real story is not oil. The real story is power. Who gets to announce agreements for other countries? Who gets to deny them? And who gets punished when they don't comply? Now let's slow down and do what the headlines won't. Treat this like a case file. Trump's claim is simple. India is ready to stop buying Russian oil. It's framed as a diplomatic win, a pressure campaign paying off, a blow to Moscow's war financing, and a victory for Washington's strategy. But then reality interrupts. India doesn't confirm it. Delhi doesn't stand at a podium and say, yes, we've agreed. And Moscow, through its own channels, signals it hasn't received notification that India is walking away. So what do these discrepancies depict in the international arena? They depict a shift from diplomacy as negotiated truth to diplomacy as performance. In normal statecraft, you align the facts before you broadcast the message. You don't announce another country's position as if you own their signature. You don't declare the outcome before the other party has spoken, especially not on high-stakes energy flows that move prices, provoke retaliation, and reshape alliances. But in this style of politics, the sequence flips. First comes the public statement, then comes the pressure. Then comes the expectation that the world will reorganize itself around the statement. And if it doesn't, if India doesn't comply, if Russia doesn't pause attacks, if reality refuses to cooperate, then the next move is not introspection. It's escalation, it's tariffs, it's sanctions, it's threats framed as consequences. Therefore, the question, is the U.S. being undiplomatic, lands hard. Because yes, when a leader repeatedly makes public claims that other governments don't validate, it erodes credibility. And credibility is the currency of alliances. But we also need to be precise. There are two possibilities that can exist at the same time. One, Trump could be exaggerating, projecting, or compressing private conversations into public victories that aren't finalized. Two, other capitals could be practicing strategic ambiguity, keeping options open, refusing to be seen as obeying Washington, and managing domestic politics while continuing quiet negotiations. In other words, it's not always lying versus truth. Sometimes it's power games versus public face. India's incentives are clear. Russian oil has been discounted. It's helped India manage inflation risk, energy security, and consumer prices. Walking away overnight is costly, financially, logistically, and politically. And India's entire strategy in a multipolar world is autonomy. It refuses to be locked into one bloc's instructions. So when Washington claims India has agreed to stop buying Russian oil, Delhi's refusal to confirm may be the signal. Not of confusion, but of sovereignty. Because confirmation would look like submission. And that brings us to the second layer. Why would Trump want India to buy Venezuelan oil now? This is where the hypocrisy question becomes unavoidable. If Venezuela is framed as a sanctioned pariah, if Washington insists restrictions exist for democracy, human rights, or legitimacy, then why pivot and tell India to buy Venezuelan oil? Because the sanctions story has always had a second track, control of flows. When energy is scarce or strategically valuable, principles become flexible. When a major buyer like India is being pressured to starve Russia of revenue, Washington needs a substitute barrel. And the substitute barrel is not chosen because it's morally clean. It's chosen because it's geopolitically useful. And Venezuela is useful for two reasons at once. First, it has massive reserves and can be positioned as an alternative to Russian crude. Second, Venezuelan oil flows can be shaped through licensing, control of payment channels, and the political leverage Washington already has over the ecosystem around Venezuelan exports. This is why the Venezuelan angle matters beyond oil. It exposes what rules are really doing in great power politics. Rules are often applied as discipline outward and adjusted as convenience inward. Now zoom out. What does this depict in the international arena? It depicts a world where the U.S. is trying to enforce alignment through public pressure, while middle powers are trying to preserve room to move, and that's not limited to India. You've already seen the same friction with Canada. The moment Canada touches a China-linked arrangement, tariffs get threatened. You've seen the UK walk into Beijing anyway, chasing growth. You've seen Europe signing corridors and diversifying leverage. So when India is placed on the same conveyor belt, stop Russian oil, buy Venezuelan oil, align with us, it's part of a wider enforcement logic. But here's the catch. Enforcement is not free. If Washington pushes too hard on India, it risks three blowbacks. First, India can slow-roll cooperation. Not loudly, quietly. It can cooperate in some areas and resist in others. It can diversify suppliers in ways that reduce U.S. leverage over time. Second, Washington risks accelerating what it fears, countries building alternative lanes so they don't get trapped by sudden U.S. ultimatums. Third, Washington risks looking unserious. And that matters because reputational capital determines how much pressure you can apply before people stop believing you can sustain it. Now let's connect this to a second example. Trump claimed Putin would agree to stop attacks for a week, and it didn't happen. Whether that exact framing was reported in the way you saw it or not, the underlying issue is the same. Statements made as outcomes that don't materialize become proof of either weak leverage or premature theatrics. And that's why it matters that these claims are being made publicly. Because public claims create public tests. If you say India agreed, and India doesn't confirm, you've created a test of U.S. influence. If you say Putin agreed, and attacks continue, you've created another test. And if you keep losing public tests, you don't just look wrong. You look weaker than the myth your power depends on. So what would Trump be thinking now? He'd be thinking about time, narrative, and elections. Midterms change the incentive structure. They reward confrontation, simple stories, visible enemies, and claims of strength. They punish nuance, slow diplomacy, and complicated realities. So if you're trying to anticipate Trump's next moves, don't start with morality. Start with incentives. He needs a storyline that says, I'm isolating Russia. I'm controlling China's influence. I'm forcing partners to choose. I'm protecting American jobs and prices. That storyline doesn't require India to actually confirm anything immediately. It requires the appearance of momentum, and that's where the tools come in. If India doesn't confirm publicly, Washington can still escalate pressure in 5 ways, each calibrated for maximum political effect. 1. More tariff threats on unrelated sectors sold as national security or fair trade, but functionally designed to create domestic pain points inside India's export industries. 2. Sanctions or secondary sanction threats on shipping, insurance, intermediaries, creating friction for any Russian oil flows without declaring war. 3. Public naming and shaming. Not quiet diplomacy, but loud messaging that frames India's oil purchases as funding war, turning energy policy into moral theater. 4. Transactional offers. Buy more U.S. energy instead. This isn't about ideology, it's about rerouting demand. 5. The Venezuelan lever, presented as a substitute option that looks like choice, but is really choose within our preferred menu. Now let's be honest about what India will do. India will do what it always does: maximize autonomy, minimize humiliation, diversify risk. That means if India reduces Russian oil exposure, it may do it partially, gradually, and quietly, so it doesn't look like a subordinate. It may increase U.S. purchases on the margin. It may explore Venezuelan barrels if costs and logistics work. But it will avoid giving Washington the clean photo op of obedience. Because the international arena is not only about buying oil, it's about not being seen as governable by another capital. And that brings us to what this entire episode reveals about the global order. The U.S. is trying to run a rules-based system like a command system. China runs a marked gravity system: incentives, trade, corridors, access. Russia survives through disruption, energy leverage, and the stubborn reality that many countries will still buy if the price is right. And middle powers, India, Brazil, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, South Africa, Mexico, navigate between them, extracting benefits from each, resisting domination by any. So when Trump says India agreed, and India doesn't confirm, it's not just an awkward moment. It's the multipolar world refusing to read from a script written in Washington. Now, the Venezuela twist makes it sharper. Because if Trump pushes India toward Venezuelan oil at the same time Washington portrays Venezuela as illegitimate, it exposes the hierarchy beneath the moral language. The hierarchy is, sanctions apply until we need the resource. That's not just hypocrisy, it's policy design, and audiences feel it, especially in the global South, because they've lived under that design for decades. Rules for you, exceptions for the powerful. So what should viewers watch next? Watch for India's next official wording, not what Trump says, but what Delhi actually confirms. The language will be careful, every adjective will matter. Watch whether Russia offers India new discounts or logistics support to retain volume. Because Moscow understands that losing India is losing revenue and prestige. Watch the sanction enforcement space, shipping insurance, intermediary firms, payment rails. That's where pressure becomes real without looking like war. Watch U.S. domestic messaging as midterms approach. Expect more public wins, more public commitments, more public claims, because theater becomes policy in election season. And watch the Venezuelan channel. Who controls the flows? Who controls the payments? And whether Venezuelan oil becomes not just a commodity, but a geopolitical instrument in the campaign to isolate Russia. Because if Washington can redirect a major buyer like India away from Russia and toward a channel it can influence, that's not just energy policy. That's strategic rerouting of sovereignty through supply. And that is the real story. Not whether Trump said it, not whether India confirmed it today, but whether the world is entering an era where major powers don't negotiate outcomes, they announce them, then punish reality until it complies. If this changed how you see the headline, share it. And in the comments, answer one question honestly. When a superpower keeps announcing other countries' decisions before those countries confirm them, are we watching diplomacy or domination by press release? This is Liberation Lens. We report the news, then we expose the structure underneath it.